Welcome, everyone, to the Special Education Inner Circle podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Witcher, and today I have with me Jackelyn Moran. And I'm excited for us to talk about an important topic of really vocabulary and terms that we need to know as parents, teachers, admin, therapists. There's a lot of alphabet soup in our IEP world, and we need to make sure we're on the same page. And that's something that's really important to Jackelyn, and she wants to make sure that you understand two really important words. So first of all, Jackelyn, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So tell us, how did you end up at an IEP table?
So I am a board certified behavior analyst, and I started out actually working one-on-one with families, most families with autism, but also other disabilities and diagnoses. And then I ended up working with schools. And so I've been on both sides of the IEP table. And I really, ended up here because I just noticed the disconnect often between families and schools and the communication. And so that's why, I ended up here and doing the mentorship program through the Master IEP Coach. And it's been really wonderful just to help bridge that gap between families and school teams.
I love to hear that. I love to hear that you're on a mission to bridge that gap between school and home, because we've seen such a magnifying glass on that problem that we've always had in special education, but with the pandemic and everything happening, just that great divide became even greater. So you mentioned the Master IEP Coach mentorship. I just want everybody to know that if you head over to masteriepcoach.com, you'll know exactly what she's talking about. And also at any point in time, if you want to get a hold of Jackelyn and talk to her, you can hop over to myiepcoach.com and fill out a form right there and just let us know that you heard Jackelyn on the podcast, and we'll get you in touch with her and it'll all be good. So that leads us into our hot topic. You could talk about a million things. We said that when it comes to special education, because you've had so much experience, but there were two words that you brought up that I was like, yes, let's do that. So tell us the two words.
So context and content. And those are two things just that I think we see and we don't really think about differentiating when we're doing IEPs.
Yeah. So I know that parents a lot of time are not informed on this, concept of content versus context. And, they learn things like FAPE, they get a free and appropriate public education, or LRE, the least restrictive environment. Well, once we get those big terms down, it's time to really figure out what's happening in the nitty gritty. And that's where content and context really hang out, is in this nitty gritty every day, what's going on. And then professionals on the IEP team tend to forget this. So break it down for us, just a general vocabulary description of content versus context for special education.
Sure. So when looking at the difference, I think, we see goals often on IEPs, both professionals and parents, and we, maybe it's looking at adding and we're like, great, yes, my kid needs to learn to add. That's perfect. But like you're saying, we often don't really differentiate between the context, which is, in what situations, with what materials, in what scenarios, and what environments are we teaching, and are we learning, and are we preparing the child for? And then the content of what is the actual skill, that we want to see. So, are we teaching money, for example, on a worksheet, which would be a context and an environmental variable, or are we using, physical money? Are we using actual money? And, changing the variables of what context you're teaching and how you're teaching that content can really help so that our students we're teaching it in a way that's most beneficial to them so that they can apply it to the real world. And we're not focusing on a skill that is not able to generalize to the environments that they're going to need.
Yeah. So, and I know that your expertise is in behavior. So let's talk about that content versus context, like this skill versus like, where is the skill happening and what's going on? I know that's something that you're coming into a situation to problem solve, and your brain like automatically goes like, okay, content, context, ABC, taking the data and all of these things. Anybody who doesn't know what ABC data is, that's a whole nother conversation for another day. In there. But that's your job, is to come in and problem solve. So let's just say there's a behavior going on. You go ahead and use an example of like, what have you seen and how do we use this concept of content versus context to break down that?
Yeah, so looking behaviorally, I think the most common thing that I see is, a child may not be, attending to task, or they're not finishing the work, or they're not able to do the work. So we see a lot of problem behaviors in the classroom or now in home, because the child is trying to, we give them their work assignment and they may be engaging in behaviors of concern or simply just not completing whatever that activity is. So context for that is really huge. I usually really sit down and look at that environment and what is happening. And typically when we're looking at attending to tasks, most of the time it's not the content. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it really is about, what is it that's happening in that environment that is either helping the child or is making it more difficult for that child to complete the activity. So some examples might be just, where they're sitting. If you, right now, where I'm at, there is a construction truck outside that's beeping. So, for example, if you hear that in your, when you're trying to work, or a child is getting these, auditory input that is distracting, that might be part of the context that just needs to change for them to be able to successfully attend to task. So there's so many things in that environment. And often it just takes somebody sitting and just sitting in that same environment and looking, could I perform in this, and really looking at everything from their seating to the, lights, the sounds, what's happening, the instructor, the environment. That's part of the environment. So how much positive interaction are they having versus negative? How many instructions are they given? Is it very overwhelming? So there's a lot of pieces when you're looking at behaviorally. It's so much of that context that you're looking at to really see, is it just something that's in this environment that is preventing them from being successful?
So what you just described is probably like 90% of the issues and concerns that parents have when they're choosing that least restrictive environment that we talked about. They'll say, this classroom's not appropriate because, but then they'll use, I just call it mom language, which is like, that's okay. So for all the parents who are listening, like, that's okay. But you'll say like that teacher's not the right fit in this classroom. I don't know how to describe it, but I know my child's not going to do well here. They get a parent instinct about it. So what you're describing there is like, the parents are seeing, even if they can't put it into words, this whole context of like what's going on around and how this isn't going to work, and then what this interaction is going to be. And I'm not even talking about a specific type of classroom. We're talking about anything from general education to resource room to self-contained room to gym class to the lunch room. All of those things you just put into words. Like, so parents who are listening to this, that's your fancy word that you need to use with the team, is that, we really need to look at the context that you're expecting my child to learn in, because they can do the content, but they can't do it in this context of what's happening. So I love that, especially as we start to reintegrate back into whatever this school, community is going to look like. For most people, it's going to be different than how the child left. And there's going to be a lot of struggles in that. Okay, so tell us a little bit more about the academic side of things. What is like academically, what could we see as a struggle of this, these two terms?
Yeah, so academically, this can be really, these get melded. So taking the, money example that we talked about, looking, a lot of times I've seen teachers and they're giving, worksheets, and it's worksheets of money. And can the individual student identify money? Can they, and they're not able to do it, on that worksheet, which is so very different from what, our actual money looks like, or things like that. So oftentimes academically, we might be using the wrong materials, or, just looking at materials that aren't able to transfer into the real world. So we might have a good content goal that, like, yes, my child needs to learn money, but you don't see, how that's actually being implemented, or they're not thinking about, okay, all right, they may have mastered that money goal, but then when you actually hand them money, they have no idea what it is. So really making sure that the materials that we're using are able to meet those needs of that child. And then, when looking at the content, what I often see with academics is the content is, maybe up here, and the child doesn't have all those prerequisites. And I know you talked with Surrey recently about executive functioning, and that those had a lot of good pieces in that about these are things that we don't think about, that the child is missing. And so our goal is for the child to maybe be able to count out money, or to be able to buy something at a store functionally, but they cannot even, one thing that I see kids may struggle with is skip counting. So, you have a 5 and then 6, 7, 8. They go 5, 10, 15, 20, and they can't change from 5s to 1s or 10s to 5s to 1s. So really looking at that content and seeing, do they have the basics and the prerequisites to really be able to master that content in a way that's functional for them.
And can we just do a shout out to all the IEP teams who are using outdated materials? Like, I'm just going to call them all out right now and say, stop. Like, I'm not kidding you. And, I don't know this person. I don't know her Instagram name. I don't know anything about her. It's like burned into my mind when I saw she was so proud. It was a younger teacher who was so proud. She probably got a lot of kind of hand-me-down materials. That happens, right? But she was so proud of teaching skills when it comes to community signs and phones and being able to use a phone. And gosh darn it, she had old phones as like in her room as part of like we practice calling. No, that is not practicing calling in the real world. Nobody, okay, it wasn't exactly the rotary phone and it wasn't exactly a pay phone, but it was like the one step after that. It was the phone that I had where it was, she had one too that was like the clear phone where you could see all the wires in. Come on, all my like 80s and 90s people know this. And like pick it up, you got the cord, it's stuck to the wall. No, we don't talk like that. So you can't say the child mastered the phone goal and then hand them an iPhone and say, call your mom.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. So let's just call them all out. Jackelyn and I just said, all of you guys who are using outdated materials, you need to advocate for better materials.
Yeah. And I know you've talked about coins in the past, and most of the time we're using cards. I very frequently have any money at all. And, it really looking at what does the student's future look like, and what are they going to be using? And a lot of times when I work with individuals who are transitioning to adulthood, it's like starting over, because what they were taught isn't relevant to the life that they're participating in, and what their community looks like. So yeah.
And I have a brother who's 43 with Down syndrome, and he swipes his debit card, knows his PIN, can sign his name, can do all of those things. But can he exactly budget? Does he know greater than, less than? Does he know whatever? Somewhat, with some direct instruction of, he worked at Walgreens. So, it's very tempting when you work somewhere and you like all the things there to just like fill up your bag. Like, oh, at the end of my shift, I'll just buy a bunch of stuff. So like he had to learn, like, you can't buy anything today, or you can only spend $10 today, or you can only he would buy his favorite shaving cream. Like my mom would say, like, dude, you already have like 3, you can buy 1, but you can't buy any more. Like, those are all math skills and following directions and doing, we're not counting out penny, nickel, dimes, and quarters in that way. So for everybody who's going to, send me some instant messages on how they hate that I say, don't teach penny, nickel, dimes, and quarters, that's okay. You can teach it. Don't take data on it. Don't waste your time on it. We've got other things to do. So absolutely, I want people and students to be working on it, but not in the way of, you have to learn a penny, the value of the penny, and all the things about the penny before you can learn the dollars.
Yeah.
Okay, so content versus context. How does that look in an IEP goal? You kind of talked about it a little bit, but just, maybe using a couple examples that you just shared, how would you define that in the goal to make sure that we're not just writing a general goal that overlooks these concepts?
Yeah, so every goal has a condition in it, or most of them do. And that is typically like a statement of, in what context. It's very similar. So, and, you can put the setting in there, you can put what materials, you can put lots of different things go into that. But that's a really good place to have, when given, dollar bills, or when given two values, or two piles of money, whenever, whatever it is that you want to look at, really putting that specifically in there is a good place so that it's very clear. When we look at IEP goals, I think we all struggle. They say, if I write it, then the next special education instructor, if they would move, should implement it. But very, very often that doesn't happen. I've gotten a ton of IEPs where I wouldn't have a clue how they implemented it. So, and they're vague. So the more specific that you are with using those important pieces of the context, looking at, functional materials, looking at real money. So you could put that right in there when given real money. Or, when you're looking at behaviors of concern, in what context do we want to see it? Is it in gym class? Is it in, in their general education setting? Is it in the resource room? Or is it when they're with, a certain activity? Is it certain types of activities? So really looking at what's the most functional things, and those things that can be applicable to the world, and making sure that those pieces are in the goal. If you put that a child will attend to tasks, that could be anything. You can, I have a student, and, one of their goals is to increase their attention to tasks. Well, this student could sit at a table for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And, so I had to explain, like, that's not what's important. What's important is how often they're responding during that time. Are they participating? Are they actively engaged? Because, we can all sit in a lecture for a long time and get nothing out of it if we're not participating and showing our responses. So it's really so important to get in there. What responses do we want the child to be having? What is it that we want to see? And, in what context, so that it's clear that at the end of the year, when they master that goal, it's something important. And it wasn't just that they were sitting at a table for 10 minutes.
I love two different things that kind of work together with what you're saying. Inside of an IEP goal, if it's behavior stuff or this task, attending to task, and that, are we talking about following directions? Is it in a structured or an unstructured, activity? Because that's huge. Like if it's a teacher directed activity, some kids do great, other kids shut down. If it's unstructured, some kids do great, other kids, are just like at a free for all in there. The other thing is preferred versus non-preferred materials is another huge one. So these are the things that can make a huge difference of, you're talking about attending a task. It's like, if you tell a child to watch their favorite TV show, they're going to sit there and watch it for 20 minutes without a problem. If you tell them to watch the History Channel for 20 minutes, they may not want to. So what's the issue? It's a preferred versus a non-preferred activity. So I love that you're bringing up all these things on how to specify the goals. So tell us, where can people reach you at myiepcoach.com, and where are you located at?
So I'm in Bridgeport, Ohio. So it is southeastern, mid-eastern, right near Wheeling, West Virginia. So it's right in that tri-state area.
So, so you have physical services of, ABA support. Is that correct? Like, I'm just tell us what you do in that way. You told us like who you are and how you ended up at the IEP table, but there's a little bit more to your story.
So I'm the founder of Valley Behavioral Health. So we have services. We have center-based services where we serve kids with autism and other developmental disabilities. We also provide academic tutoring here, where students who are struggling, a lot of the kids that we see in school are missing those prerequisites. So when we talk about content, they're missing those prerequisite skills, and they're trying, the teachers and the team are trying to teach them skills that are up here. And we really work on getting them fluent in some of those baby steps and those prerequisites so that they can flourish in that environment. And so we offer those services here, and then we also support schools. So I go into a few local school districts and work with their teams and in trying to best support students' needs within the school, and helping the teams and the teachers with things like this, where how can we help a child be successful and be successful in learning in that environment.
So you just kind of flipped some people out when you said that you have ABA therapy services and you're the founder of these services and you work with schools and you go into schools. That's a completely foreign concept for so many people. So can you just give some encouragement to, maybe what a parent or even a teacher should do if they're looking for some outside support? How do they start to request that or seek that out or look for it?
So I think starting with just asking the school. I think a lot of families are struggling and they don't know what might be available. So even just flat out asking a school saying, my child is struggling, I need help, I need support, or, this isn't working for them. Is there anywhere that we can find more? A lot of times it's difficult to get resources from schools because if they recommend something to a family, they're often required to provide that, when some of it might be appropriate for a school to provide and to fund, but also, it might be beneficial to get outside services too. So a lot of times counties have local resources. We have a resource list that we give to families to seek things out, but you can look online for providers for services. And yeah, often it can be difficult. I think that families find the most resources from other families, at least, in our area. When I ask, how did you find out about us? They found out from other families in the area that were struggling. So try to really build that network, and because it's difficult to, in certain areas. I know we're more rural, and even, if you call the county and say, I want this service, you're not necessarily going to get an answer of everything that's offered in the area.
Yes. So everybody who's like, yes, that sounds like me. Like I never get the right answer. I never get everything. It's not just you, it's everywhere with that. So we'll give a couple of other resources here. One, I'll make sure that everybody has a link to your services in the show notes here. So we'll make sure they have that. We already mentioned myiepcoach.com. So if you want to reach directly out to Jackelyn and figure out some next steps, because something that we talked about really, hit home and you're like, yes, I need more information on that, please feel free to contact us at myiepcoach.com and we'll get you connected there. The other thing is the Special Education Inner Circle. So you guys are listening right now to the Special Education Inner Circle podcast. We actually have a private community where I can really connect you with Jackelyn on a different level. I can make sure that you have access to the resources. There's a lot of parent-to-parent support, but there's also parent, teacher, admin, therapist, just kind of system support inside of the Special Education Inner Circle. It's completely different than anything that's out there. So you can head over to specialedinnercircle.com. All right, we could probably list resources forever. So we're just going to let everybody go there. They're going to take their notes. They're going to reach out to us. They're going to know the difference between content and context. They're going to break down the goals, write them up in a specific way. So there's not that confusion over what are we doing and where are we doing it at with that. And Jackelyn, I just want to say thank you so much for bringing this topic to the surface. We need to talk about this stuff more.
Thank you. Yes, I love it. I am totally nerdy about all of this. So always willing to talk about, how to help kids learn more efficiently.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here, and we'll talk to you next time.